Good morning and happy Tuesday. Today is Tuesday, December 1st, and we here at the Illinois Science and Technology Institute are thrilled to be celebrating Giving Tuesday. In honor of the fact that innovation is truly everywhere, we are highlighting innovators around the nation throughout the day through our very first virtual career fair. We are joined this morning by Lindsay from Microsoft, and before I welcome him on, just want to take a moment to talk a little bit about ISTI and what we do. So we are a STEM education focused nonprofit. We are located in Chicago, but we serve the state of Illinois. Our goal is to truly extend the definition of what STEM means for our students so that they can develop their own identity as they explore all that STEM has to offer. If you are interested in donating this year for Giving Tuesday, our goal is $12,500 to meet the needs of our school scholarships. You can donate using the link that will be in our comments momentarily, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the programming, both today, and you can find videos as the week goes on. So with that, I want to introduce Lindsay. I'm going to pull him into stream. Steve, again, is a cloud solution architect over at Microsoft. Steve, how are you this morning?
Hi, I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Well, we are so excited to hear from you and learn from you about your pathway. So pretty quickly, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your path into STEM.
Sure. So my name's Steve Lindsay. I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. I've been in various positions at Microsoft over the years, but now I work for a division called One Commercial Partner, and I help partners deliver products into the Microsoft marketplace for Azure. So I wondered quite a while what I could say on this and what would be useful. So I figured I'd tell my story a little bit first and kind of give you an introduction of where I came from and how I ended up working for Microsoft and, you know, what I think of it and stuff like that I'll bring afterwards. But so my story's kind of weird. I was born in the northeast of England in a very small town. There wasn't really many technical things there or resources. There was a very simple technical college, but you know, it didn't really have any programs which were very good or anything like that. And you know, being a child of the 80s, 90s, my parents divorced and I left home and left school when I was 15, turning 16 years old. So this presented me with a bit of a challenge. Going to school and you know, things like that weren't really an option for me at the time. And I tried various things. I started building PCs and things like that. And eventually I got lucky. I installed a computer network system at a company in the northeast of England, and somebody spotted what I'd done and they asked me if I wanted to interview for a job. But let me go back a bit. Let me rewind. I'm going to rewind to when I was 6 years old. One of the things about technology for me is I feel like it came naturally to me when I was younger. And I actually don't even remember really being 6. What I do remember is mostly what my parents have told me. And that was when I was 6 years old, the school came to my parents after they got their first computer. And they basically said, Steve's showing a really big talent for this, which I don't remember. And, you know, we think it'd be good for him to have a computer. Unfortunately, the area I grew up in wasn't an affluent area. My parents were, you know, very simple people. They had simple jobs, and they couldn't afford to get me one. So after about another year, the school actually offered to get a computer for my parents, and they gave me it for Christmas. I didn't find out until much later that it was the school that stepped in. And they bought me this BBC microcomputer, which ironically, I have it in my cupboard over there. I still have it. And this computer was made in 1982 by Acorn Electronics for the BBC Corporation, British Broadcasting Corporation. And basically every school had these computers. So, you know, I eventually ended up with one in my house, and no one told my parents there was a way to get software for it. On the BBC Micro, the original way was a tape recorder, which you plugged into the computer, and you actually played the tape for 2 minutes to load a program or whatever it took, and that's how you'd load software. But my parents couldn't really afford to get much software, and I ended up with basically the instruction manual for the basic language, and that's how I started programming. By the time I was 11, I'd written my first game, and you know, I loved programming. I loved making things happen, and back then it was a lot simpler. You know, it's 10 print my name, 20 go to 10, that type of thing. So, by the time I was about 11, I kind of mastered the basic language, and I started playing around with 6502 assembly on it. I don't know how, but I basically learned 6502, and I started blowing EEPROMs chips to go in the computer, replace parts of the operating system and stuff like that. From there, I went on to get a Commodore Amiga computer, and I got the Commodore Amiga. I started playing with Blitz Basic on the Commodore Amiga, and eventually C and C++. So I was a hobbyist who was, basically playing around with these languages, but I wasn't using them for a job. I didn't even know it was useful for a job. There was just no technology jobs where I grew up. So, when I left home, like I said, 15, 16, I actually started a business with a friend building PCs for people. And, this would have been 1992, I think, somewhere around there. And basically, there was a big boom, and we started making quite a bit of money out of it. It was really fun for a while. But then I realized that if I wanted to do anything, I needed to start looking at doing things for businesses. So we built this network for this company, and a company in the south of England actually saw this network that I built, and they saw it pop up, and they managed to get hold of me through my dad, which is a whole different story, which is funny. The guy actually met my dad through a completely different event, not connected to me or to the job I'd done. He was at a wedding for his girlfriend at the time. And he actually bumped into this guy, and the guy started talking about what he did. And my dad mentioned me doing the work for that company, and he asked for my contact number. I got offered a job by them in 1997, I'm sorry. And that company moved me down south to London, Watford, just outside London. And I started working for them as a junior network analyst. And I hadn't done much of networking at the time at all, but the company ended up training me up. And within a year of me being there, they were bought out by a big corporation, Cable and Wireless Communications. And Cable and Wireless decided to go full on with me to get me to be a network engineer. So they trained me up on Cisco routers, and I did my CCNA, and I was studying my CCNP and troubleshooting TCP/IP and stuff like that. So I learned the network side of it. It was really good because knowing the network side and programming side is useful. So I was always trying to mesh these two together to try and get more programming in my career. From there, I ended up moving to, after about 3 years, I think, I actually got a headhunter call me about a job for a voice over IP company. Now, this was in late 99, 2000. And actually, I think it was halfway through 2000. And because I did actually end up working the night of the Millennium Bug on night shift, which was interesting. Still to this day, it's the most money I have ever earned for one night's work. And it's the least eventful one night that I've ever had in my life. Nothing happened. Everything worked perfectly. So basically, I went to this other company which had headhunted me, and they said, do you want to see Europe? Do you want to see America? Do you want to travel the world? And I was like, whoa, yeah, because I was like 21 years old or something. And, they basically wooed me with the promise. And sure enough, I got to travel all over with them. I was installing hardware cards for Dialogic, voice over IP card, voice over IP technology. And I was going to all big telcos, British Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, Italia Telecom, that type of thing. And I basically did that for 2 or 3 years, but I was bored. My day job was basically doing the hardware installation for the cards and then configuring software for it. And some of the software was crazy. It was like tunneling IPX and SPX over TCP and stuff like this. It was really boring work. But during the day, I programmed. During the night, I programmed. And I ended up rewriting a piece of their software to integrate with CRMs. And I managed to make it possible for you to be able to send data into a CRM application. That's a database for customer relationship management software. It's a database. So if you can imagine when you phone up, like say you phoned American Express, and American Express were able to actually say, oh, hello, we see this is Steve Lindsay, and we see that you're overdue on your balance and you need to pay it. So they know that information about you because it's carried along with the call. And I was responsible for some of the first integrations with CRMs through this program I'd written on my own time just because I was enthusiastic. So the company saw this and they basically said, we need you to move to the United States for us because it's not good you writing software without our permission in the UK, which really works out successfully. So it's kind of a little weird, but they moved me to the US to integrate with their development team there and actually put in the product, and it was. So that was back in 2003 that I moved, and I stayed on with that company for a good few years, another 3 or 4 years after I moved to the US. And from there, I actually went and joined Microsoft when they first came to Long Island in New York, which I should have mentioned. I live in Long Island, New York, out in the sticks, all the way east. So basically, I joined Microsoft. I was the first Microsoft employee on Long Island after they'd acquired this company, which was interesting. And I joined as a test developer. So I was a software development engineer in test, and I was writing the infrastructure for, ironically, something which is very similar to Azure these days. We were writing a software management software which allowed us to push out images to virtual machines to run automatic test cases against Exchange, Microsoft Exchange, and Forefront, the security product, which wasn't called Forefront back then, but it was Sabari antivirus, and Microsoft acquired Sabari and then turned it into Forefront. So anyway, from there, I basically, I worked my way up and I became a developer at Microsoft, and around about 2006, 2007, I started getting a feeling that I should do something else and really expand myself. So I actually left Microsoft then, and I went to Wall Street and did a startup on Wall Street, writing high frequency trading software and order management systems for companies who were trading on Wall Street. We also managed like risk for a lot of companies and using the FIX protocol. And basically I did that for a few years, and the company was very small. There was only about 4 or 5 of us, and eventually they had to downsize a bit and I had to move on. So at that point I went for a job in the taxi industry and actually competed against Uber while Uber was starting up, and not only Uber, but the predecessor to Uber, which name slips me now, I can't even remember. But I ended up writing the mobile application that competed with Uber in New York City, and it's still in use to this day by taxi cab companies all around the country. And I did the driver side app and I did a passenger side app for it. It was a lot of fun. And for a while I was the CTO of that actual company, which had been spawned off to do the hailing software. From there, I eventually I had a child in this time, and I wasn't seeing much of my daughter when I was traveling to the city, both Wall Street and at the company after that. So I decided I didn't want to work from an office anymore, which back then was a little challenging. This was 2016, I think I decided it. No, 2014. So I actually talked to my boss at the job I was at, and I said, look, if I quit and start a contracting company up, would you hire me as a contractor to do the same work I'm doing? That way I can work from home, and you guys will be happy because I'm doing that work for you. And they said, sure. So I ended up doing that, started up a contracting company. And 3 months after I started the contracting company, I was contacted by a recruiter for Microsoft, and they said, hey, we've got a position for a technical evangelist on the DX team, the developer experience team. Is this something you're interested in? Obviously, I said, yeah, this sounds great. Is it remote? And they said, yeah, it's remote. You'll have some traveling to come visit people on site and things like that, but for the most part, it's remote. So I jumped at that chance. I came into Microsoft again in 2016 and joined as a technical evangelist in the developer experience group. Then Microsoft reorged, and all the technical evangelists became cloud solution architects. So I became a cloud solution architect for Azure specifically, and then started working as a CSA for Azure. And obviously through the different jobs I've had and the path I've got here, I've gained the experience in all the different areas. I didn't mention, but when I left Microsoft, I'd actually transferred from being an SDET to a dev, and then to a program manager. So I was a program manager for 6 months. I didn't like it, wasn't my cup of tea, and that's when I left. In the voice over IP company, I was called an integration specialist. In Microsoft now, I've been a technical evangelist and now a cloud solution architect. In cable and wireless, I was a network architect. So I had lots of different things, but the one thing that I always go back to is I'm a programmer, and my tool set changes, right? It changes a lot. Before I came into Microsoft as CSA, I hadn't touched Azure, for instance, and I learned the tool set for Azure, and I develop against all them pieces of Azure now. And that's been my one consistent thing. When somebody asks me what I do, I'm a developer. It doesn't matter what role I'm in, I'm always a developer. So that's been a constant for me, and that came from, learning over time, something which if you guys are doing comp sci at college, you'll probably learn in 2 to 4 years what it took me probably 6 years to learn while I was doing it on this, on the side from my job I was doing at the time. But over the years, I managed to build that up. You guys probably get a big head start on that by learning it right from the bat, because I made some terrible mistakes along the way. But it helped me learn, so that's what I did. And that's basically an intro about me and where I'm at now. I've got a few stories about interesting things I've done kind of over the years. And let me just take a drink. Energy drinks have been a constant with me as well. It helps me when I'm programming. One of the questions which I was posed previously is what motivated me to get into the field I'm in. So it's really interesting. I remember a time when I was 14 years old, and I was walking over the bridge near my house in Redcar, was the town I was from in England. And my dad said to me, "Son, what do you want to do when you grow up, when you leave school?" And I said, I haven't really thought about it before. And up until that point, whenever I'd thought about what I wanted to do when I left school, you're going to laugh, but I wanted to be an ice cream man. I wanted a little ice cream truck with a big cone on the top of it. And I wanted to sell ice creams on the seashore in Redcar. It was just something I'd liked as a kid. I never did do it. But my dad asked me at this point, and I'd been doing a lot with the computer at that point. I just started doing the EEPROM programming, I think, was behind me by that point. I think I was writing in C at that point. And I'd been reading a lot of magazines, and I remember there was a magazine which had Bill Gates on the cover of it, and it showed what he'd done with MS-DOS, and I think it was Windows 2.0 at the time that had just been released. I was amazed by it. I really wanted to do that type of stuff. So I guess it was just on my mind. So I said to my dad, when I'm older, I want to move to America and I want to work for Microsoft. And my dad laughed, and he's like, son, I was asking you because I want you to take the garage over when you're 16, and he wanted me to take over his garage. I should say a garage is like the equivalent of a shop in the US, I think. It's where you get car fixed, as opposed to a service station, which you call garage, I think I'm right. So anyway, basically, I told him that, and I forgot about it for years. And then after I'd moved to the US, I ended up calling my dad when I was 26, and I'd been hired by Microsoft for the first time. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, Dad, I just got a job. I'm going into Microsoft to write code for Bill Gates." And it actually was Bill Gates at that time. It switched to be Ballmer when I was there, but it was Bill Gates. And it was really funny. My dad laughed and he's like, "Yeah, I always knew you'd do it, son." I'm just thinking at the back of my head, no, you just wanted me to work in your garage. You didn't think I'd make it, because no one from that area in England gets into technology, but I got lucky. So that was where my motivation came from. I saw what was possible by, a very small Microsoft at the time, and a dream of making something which was useful for people to use. And could solve a lot of problems. And boy, has that exploded since then. It's pretty crazy. So another one thing I wanted to cross, although I don't have a similar educational background to many of you, people ask, is there a required degree or training or anything like that that's needed? I would say anything which gives you a leg up on having to learn it firsthand and make mistakes is good. Like I said, I made a lot of mistakes over the time. Maybe on another call at some point, I'll admit some of them, but it's not going to be now. But I made some interesting mistakes over the years, which wouldn't have happened if I'd have got a comp sci degree. I definitely think that's an essential set of fundamentals for people moving into technology, whether they want to be a developer or whether they actually just want to do work on data models or AI or anything like that. So I'm all about comp sci. I think that's really good. The other thing that people are looking at a lot now is data science. And I would say I'm pretty good at data science, but I'm certainly not anywhere near the level of people who've done degrees or masters in data science. And that seems to be a hot one just now. We need people to look at all this immense amount of data that we've collected over the years, and every company has it. It's interesting in the job that I did that was doing the hailing for taxi cabs. Companies have data that they don't even know how useful it is. For instance, in the taxi cabs, every taxi has a computer in it, or it used to, a computer in it, and in that is a GPS module, and that's tracking GPS ticks. And these are the global positioning satellite ticks, lat and long, of where the cab is at any point. And I ended up finding out through that industry, and they weren't doing anything with it at the time, the company I was with, and they started doing something with it, that these GPS ticks, along with the cell phone signal, because all of the computers that are in taxis are connected via a USB modem effectively, and they connect to the 3G or 4G networks. And they have a signal strength for their modems. There's a lot of weird things can happen with this. For instance, if you haven't got a signal on the modem in the cab, how do they actually authorize a credit card? So there's interesting little things around that where they do techniques like store and forward to store the messages up so that if they lose a signal, they can forward them. But still, if you can't do a live credit card transaction, can't the transaction be lost at that point? You authorize somebody for a $40 ride and then the card's turned down after they've left the cab. These are real industry problems that have to be dealt with, and there's ways for dealing with them in many different ways. I won't go into the specifics just now, but basically it's about building trust with the driver, and the driver having a trust rating so he can have a limit which he's approved to do, and there has to be a safe limit where, if the card is declined, you take the hit for the actual trip, which has to then be weighed against the average trip price so that you don't lose money. So all sorts of stuff, and that's what the data science degree is, really, really, really good for. So like I'm looking down the list of questions which I was using as a guidance for this, and the next one was, when you were younger, what career were you planning to go into? Well, like I said, an ice cream man, obviously. My current role and position is interesting because it brings together a lot of the skills that I've built up over the years, from being a CTO, the director of development that I was at the taxi company and on Wall Street, to the program manager side of it that I was at Microsoft, to the tester that I was when I first came to Microsoft, and to the network analyst. Like, all of these roles have played a big part in bringing me to the CSA place now. As a CSA, I use all of them skills to look at what a partner wants to achieve and to help them realize it. And in many cases, to actually see things which would improve their products or lead them to discovery of a new product through the data that they've got and so on. So, the networking side of it and the coding is obviously used when I'm doing proof of concepts, or I'm working hand in hand. I do a project called Code With at Microsoft, where we actually sit with the partner and we code with them for 6 weeks on their product. And basically the partner then takes what they want from what we've done together, and they own that code at that point, and they can release it. So I can introduce techniques I've learned from development over the years and networking tweaks and things like that to help them configure the system in the best way, and according to best practice guidelines for architectures. Then there's the design part of it, designing an architecture, seeing where different pieces of a product can actually do certain jobs. And many times there's competing products. So, for instance, you've got what are called document data stores now, which store all of the data in JSON, just the JavaScript object notation. And you've got SQL databases, traditional relational databases, where you've got columns and rows and relationships between table and row data. So you have to look at the pros and cons of both of them, and sometimes you end up with a hybrid solution. Sometimes you end up with a solution which falls more to one technology. And this is a lot of what we do as cloud solution architects. It's to look at what somebody wants to achieve and to help them build a bigger picture architecture for it and guide them in the right way, so that when they do go to release the market, they'll have a solid product which is using good guidelines and good practices. So my day-to-day experience and my role is really interesting. This is the portion that I wanted to kind of talk a little about it. Involvement at Microsoft is really interesting. You can be involved in anything you want, and I mean that literally. A good example of this is I've worked on several programs in Microsoft for gaming. I've worked on virtual reality and augmented reality projects. I've done a lot of outside of my normal day job role, what we call cross-group collaboration, which is where you'll work with another team and you'll see something in the other team and you'll I know how to fix that. And I've got a couple of examples of this. If you've ever uploaded a file to the internet, there's a little upload button that you press, and when you press that button, the file uploads, you see a progress indicator, and the file's done. Well, it never used to be like that. There used to be an upload button, and when you press that upload button, you were able to select one file only, and then it would transmit it over the internet, and it would lock your browser up for the entire time that you're doing it. So if you were uploading a large file, like a 2 meg file, if you were uploading a large file, I'm saying a 2 meg file, let's say a 2 gig file, the browser would lock up until it was done. And if your connection was really slow, then your browser would be locked up. And what did people do? They closed the browser because they thought it had crashed and the file was lost. So I ended up designing a control to do this asynchronously, with a little progress indicator telling you when the file will be done and so on. And what do you know? I wrote it for myself, and it wasn't part of my role. And it was picked up by a team in Microsoft, and it was released as part of the Ajax Control Toolkit for .NET. As of last count that I looked at, it had 3.5 million downloads of the source code. It was a pretty big deal, and eventually integrated. Excuse me, I'm very sorry. I'm not used to talking this long without pausing. So it was picked up by the team for Visual Studio eventually, and I believe it's in the Controls Visual Studio standard now. So that was one of them. Another one was my mind went blank for a second. I'm actually going to move to the question that we've got just now.
Steve, I can hop in too to give you a quick breather, because I love so much of what you've said so far, and I'd love to hit a little bit further on some of that. So take a breather for a moment to some things I just want to highlight for some of our viewers as well. Is something that I really like that you pointed out, and I'll ask you a question about a little later, was this idea that the company is training you, or you said it trains you up in certain things. And so I'd love to hear more about that in a moment in terms of how Microsoft continues to let you grow and expand on your passions and experiences, which I know when you and I first connected, a lot of that was in AI and virtual mixed reality. So I would love to hear from that. And then I'd also love to hear, you mentioned that you have a tool set and your tool set changes. And I love that metaphor a lot. I used to use that in my classroom with my students in math, being like, all of these skills are things you're putting in your toolkit so that when you approach a problem, you have the tools to solve that problem. And so I'd love to hear about that as well in terms of your tool set, looking at your day-to-day work or general skills that you've acquired. What are the tools that you truly pull out on a daily basis?
Yeah, so what I mentioned about the tool sets is interesting because that tool set could be a cloud. It could be a language. It could be a development studio. I'll give an example. You talked about AI and virtual reality. I did some work on the HoloLens. I've done various different customer engagements with the HoloLens, which is Microsoft's what they call mixed reality device, which is basically augmented reality, but they call it mixed because the device can actually detect surfaces and walls and things like that. So if you can imagine, if you wore a HoloLens, you could have R2-D2 basically stood, a hologram of R2-D2 stood on your couch because it would be aware of where it is. And
wow.
There's actually games on the HoloLens, which some of them are kind of fun, where you can play characters and you can jump all over your furniture and things explode and they land in the right places. And there was this murder mystery one I played, which was fantastic, where you were at a murder scene and you were examining the evidence, but you could walk around time, you could freeze time, move it forwards and backwards and watch the scene from anywhere you could see and get under objects and so on, and interacted with your phone. Really cool. So the tool set for that, for instance, is Unity 3D. It's 3D software. It uses the same development software as game studios use to write many of the games. So, you know, I had to pick up Unity 3D to work on HoloLens and translate them skills to something which made sense for us, while still tying that back to Azure as well, because I wanted to use Azure in this. And I was using the vision APIs from cognitive services to do things like recognizing QR codes. So you could wear a HoloLens, walk down an aisle, scan a QR code, and you'd see the object pop up in front of you, that type of thing. So the tool set changes, but on a day-to-day basis for me, VS Code I use a lot, which is Microsoft's lightweight version of Visual Studio. There is no replacement for Visual Studio in my eyes. So I use full-blown Visual Studio as well. I often use the debugger in full-blown Visual Studio because it's better than VS Code in my opinion. I use, my most used tool is Teams because every role that I've been in over probably the past 10 years now is extremely collaborative. There was times where I was the cowboy, right? I was the guy who was doing all of it. I was coding the installer, I was coding the code, you know, I was pushing out of the site, I was making sure it didn't go down. When it did go down, I'd get it back up. Then days are over, right? Now there's full DevOps processes and you have teams that you work with who manage individual pieces of it. So I constantly work with other people, other experts in my field, on my team, who know a lot more about SQL, for instance, than me, and ones who know a lot more about machine learning than me, and the HoloLens team who know a lot more about the HoloLens team, for instance. So my main tools are always, for me as a developer, Visual Studio, VS Code, the Azure portal, all of the SDKs for Azure covering pretty much anything that I need to use, whether it's Service Fabric, whether it's you know, cognitive services, whether it's the Vision API and so on and so forth, whether it's Cosmos DB. But each of them I've picked up in different stages. Like if I have an opportunity to use one of these technologies, I'll learn a base level of it, right? And levels that we call of it, like a 100 is a basic understanding, 200 is, you know, you've configured it, you've installed it, you know how it works, but you're not down at the nitty gritty yet. 300 is, okay, I know how to make things work in this in really good architectures, and you know everything's going to be solid, it's good to go to production. And 400 is, I live, dream, and sleep this technology, which I got up to a 400 level in Cosmos DB, and possibly 400 in other things, but I like to stay around 300 across the board, basically. So them tools change constantly. Every opportunity that I get, has something new. You know, I did one with a hospital, and I'd love to mention this one actually, because this was so gratifying to do. It wasn't with a hospital, it was with a healthcare technology company, a big one.
Okay.
And I was contacted because I also trained in Xamarin, which is mobile software development. Microsoft eventually bought Xamarin, but I'd been training it for years. I'd used it when I'd done the taxi software as well as Objective-C and Swift. Sorry, is that my time up?
No, you are good.
Yes, I use Swift and Objective-C, but I've used Xamarin, and Xamarin's like a framework which lets you develop for any mobile device rather than developing just for the iPhone or for Android. And because I had this experience, an opportunity came in, an Azure opportunity, which had Azure pieces for the back end, which they didn't need help with because there was other CSS doing that stuff. And then there was the front end, which they needed help with. So I got to work on the front end. We designed a brand new control, which had never been used on a mobile app before. And it represented what they call the golden hour. And this is to do with cardiac patients, stroke patients. When someone's had a stroke, that 1 hour after they've had a stroke is the single most important time.
Yeah.
If you haven't done certain actions by the end of that hour, then the chance of somebody making it is very, very slim.
Right.
I got to work on this application. We designed this control which shows like a golden hour where each point on the clock is each point that it should have went to in the system, so you can monitor it as somebody's going through. And you know, there was handoff from ambulatory, from the stage that they were there, into the hospital check-in process and beyond the hospital check-in process. Really cool stuff. And you know what really made a difference to me? This app's out there saving lives. And
right.
I got to work on it. And the sense of gratification from something like that is amazing. And I'll give another example. And that was an example of, you know, the skills from the mobile development coming into it. And that's something I've only done 1 or 2 mobile projects because I don't typically work on client applications in my role. But because I had the skills, they said, hey, do you want to help out with this? And I did. So another one which I did, which was really, really cool, which was just released in pilot as well, was a virtual reality one. I was asked to come in because I know quite a lot about virtual reality and augmented reality and help a partner make a selection on technologies to use for the hardware. And we helped them choose a virtual reality headset. It wasn't a Microsoft one. You know, we have ones, but for this particular project, one of the other manufacturers had one which was better for the job. So that's the one that was recommended. And we went with that one. And we got the software working. We had an Azure backend for it. And what this did was really cool. And hopefully I won't get tearful when I'm talking about it because it's really cool. So it's for patient end-of-life care. So when people are in homes and, you know, they're going to die within a few years, they often need, you know, help, a lot of help.
Yeah.
And they're kind of restricted to being in these places, which they have all the help they need there. But it becomes very hard for them to communicate with people on the outside and to get an experience of what the outside is, because often they can't manage to do it. And especially now with COVID, you know, this is something which, you know, is just a genius idea. And the company that came up with it, amazing for coming up with this. They created a virtual reality experience. And that virtual reality experience allowed them to travel to places which, you know, they might be from their past or,
sure,
you know, and they could go into them 3D environments or in that 3D environment, see their family and actually have some kind of interaction beyond just talking on a cell phone or on video, bringing that next level of it where they actually felt like they're in that environment. And that was just, it was so gratifying working on that. And
yeah,
the big thing for me was I'd worked on it, and often I get to do these projects, but I don't see what happens after my involvement. So you have to really chase. But I've got this brilliant person that I work with who contacted me afterwards, and she always does. She always contacts me and tells me what the outcome is. And it was like 6-7 months later, maybe longer.
Yeah.
And she's like, hey, I want you to see this. And she gave me a video for YouTube, and I put the video on. And it was the nursing homes talking about their experience with it and the actual people that were going to use it and using it, actually talking about the change it had made. And it just really moved me. So, I mean, I've got a million different things.
I love that. And no, I will definitely encourage our viewers if they want to hear more stories about that, or I don't know if that video is something that can be publicly shared, but we'd love to share that. I think you hit on two really important things, which is using technology for good. Just because we have certain technology doesn't always mean that we're putting it in places where it makes a meaningful impact for people's lives. So I love that you shared two examples where these are really critical moments for humans, right? The humans are behind the users. They are our user. And so I think that's a really important just perspective to keep in mind, especially as you continue to fill your tool set with things that are amazing and new and captivating, but really has the human side aspect of it. And we are running up on our time. And so I did want to get to a question that was dropped in the comment box. And this is from one of the ISTI members, Sarah. So she mentioned that it's been super interesting to hear from you and how you work with your clients through different phases. And if you brainstorm something and bring it to the design phase, but it's no longer feasible, where do you go from there? So you talked a little bit about hybrid solutions, but what does that process look like? And with that question.
Yeah, I'm excited about the question. Actually, it's an interesting one. So we actually have different ways of dealing with different things that come into the pipeline, right? We might get what we call just simple tech tasks, right? Which might be we have a partner who they're flying along, they're doing everything the way they should be. They just want to quiz us about certain things in the technology. So they're kind of low-hanging fruit, easy to knock out. You know, it's just a tech task. You get on a call, you have a conversation, you work through it with them. Maybe you send them some source code, maybe you show them some configuration. Then we have other ones which come in which require what we call an ADS, which is an architectural design session. We normally want to do an ADS with a partner no matter what, right? Like whatever they bring in, we still want to look at the architectural design. During that phase, we work hand in hand with the partner to actually refine and ensure that it's feasible.
Okay.
And we work through that design stage. We normally go on to a second step, and we have a couple of programs which tie these steps together. We have one called Code First, and Code First actually ties together the architectural design session and the POC. So if we do a Code First with a partner, we normally get in with them, do a couple of day ADS, design it out with them, make sure that everybody's happy about the design. And then in a couple of days that follow that, we actually move straight to a POC, and we actually create it in Azure within that couple of days and get them kind of head started with a good architecture and a good proof of concept proving it, so that they can go off and maybe get executive funding or whatever they need to do to go along with the product. Then we have straight ADS. They just want to design it with us, get out of our hair. We want to code it ourselves, and we just do the ADS. Now, you bring up an interesting point, Sarah, because what you asked is, how do we know that's going to be of a quality level for us to publish and co-market with the partner if it goes in our marketplace? So if we've just done the ADS with them, we didn't get our eyes on them doing the coding section, right? So we've got to kind of watch that process as it goes through. And we're involved from the first point that we meet the partner right the way through to the marketplace. And at any stage, we can do kind of an architectural review. We have a process just now, which is called TTV, and that's the tech team validation process. And what happens is, let's say we've done an ADS and we've done a POC, and then they've gone off into a development phase for, say, 6 weeks or 6 months, whatever it is. When that solution goes to go into market, it triggers what's called a tech team validation. That logs an incident on the person who worked with them initially on the architecture and the design. So let's say it was my customer, it was my incident initially. It logs an incident on me to go in and validate everything before we publish it to the market. And at that point, that's where I do the validation of the actual design. And, you know, we either say, hold your horses, there's something wrong here, you shouldn't be doing that. We help figure it out. Or, you know, we sign off on it and we go to market with them and publish it in the marketplace.
Cool.
Hybrid solutions, very quickly on that. Hybrid solutions are very, very, very common. Basically, we have what we call cloud first, which is, you know, we'll do it using cloud technologies first. Then you have hybrid, and then you have cloud native, right? So cloud first is kind of a little bit of hybrid, but we can work with all of that. We have offline services for Azure for on-prem only solutions like Azure Stack. We have solutions which actually use the cloud when needed and can boost into the cloud, for instance, Kubernetes containers, where it's using ones locally, but we can boost up with it. That's all part of the design process, and it's often set by the limitations of a partner to be able to make a full commitment to the cloud. Some of that's data security reasons, some of it's because they've got existing infrastructure they want to use. And basically it's a matter of us looking at both of these and making sure that we design something which works well for them. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think that was wonderful. Thank you so much. So Steve, it was a pleasure to hear from you, learning about your path. One last thing I want to touch on for our viewers is, Steve, you hit on something that is really near and dear to ISTI, and that's the issue of access. So you said early on, this access of a computer, that your school recognized that you needed access to this so that you could flourish and explore this pathway. And that is what we're trying to do today for Giving Tuesday, is really to provide access for our schools. And we do that through school scholarship. So if anyone was moved or again believes in this idea of exposing students early, providing that access point, make an impact today and donate with us. The link is in the chat. Otherwise, Steve, thank you so much. And to everyone else, we'll be back on here at noon. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, Steve.
Cheers, you too. Bye-bye.